I just put out a song in collaboration with a VTuber called Kira Lily called Kimi no moto. If you've checked out the song, thank you very much. But you probably also noticed that the song has this kind of like Bocchi The Rock feel about it. And that was a very deliberate choice on both Lily's part and my part. We were both kind of big fans of Bocchi The Rock and the music from that show. So we deliberately wanted to take the song very much in that kind of direction. So today I thought I'd like to go through the project of this song and just kind of walk through three main aspects about this song and the kind of choices I've made to take it into that kind of Bocchi The Rock type of music direction. So the three main aspects that I want to cover today is the songwriting, arrangement, and the mix of the song. And hopefully by sharing those choices that I've made in those three aspects, I can share with you just general tips and tricks that you can use to help write your own songs to sound like the music from Bocchi The Rock. So firstly, I'd like to talk about the arrangement. So turning our attention to the project here, we can kind of see that the arrangement for this track is incredibly simple. And listening to any of the music from the show, you'll be able to tell that the arrangement is also very simple there too. So we're only dealing with two separate guitar parts, one bass, and then a drum kit, and then vocals, and that's it. That's all we've got. Literally just two guitars, bass, drums, vocals. So that's 5 parts that we've got. Essentially what we're trying to do is just picture this as though it's a live band performing right in front of us. So there is no kind of trickery with adding more layers when we feel like it needs it. So kind of off of keeping a very simple arrangement. For example, when the lead part comes in, the guitar on the right side, it just goes from playing rhythm straight to playing lead. So we've technically dropped a layer. Whereas on a more conventional studio recording, this might be a separate layer that comes on top of these rhythm guitars down at the bottom. But again, we're trying to keep it very stripped back and straightforward of just 2 guitars and trying to utilize that to the maximum. On the topic of the guitars, I just want to quickly go over the tone because with such a simple arrangement, the tone is a really important factor. So the main thing about this tone is that there is pretty much as little gain as I can get away with. Obviously, if it gets too little gain, then you're just dealing with a clean signal. And what I'm using here, I believe, I recorded this a while ago, so it was before I had my Blues driver. This was a DSL-20 on the clean channel with some kind of boost in front of it. I think it might have been a tube screamer. This is all modeled off my quad cortex, obviously. And the main thing about this tone is that the amount of gain can vary significantly just based on how hard or softly I'm picking. Again, I'm trying to keep this very simple, so there's no patch changing at all. There's no jumping from one amp to another or turning pedals on and off. It's just literally pick lighter, cleaner, pick harder, more gain. And to kind of add on top of that even more, the volume part played a very big role in getting that dynamic range out of this tone. Most of the time I'm riding with the volume down slightly, which is kind of unconventional if you in kind of more modern guitar playing. Usually more modern stuff is just volume and tone up all the way, all the time. So right now it's kind of like on the numbers on this guitar is like at a 6, I guess. So for example, in the chorus I'm playing with a tone that's kind of like this. And then during the solo, I'd roll it up. And you can kind of hear me doing it in the song where I'm playing with the volume knob to get a different amounts of gain out of the tone that I'm using. You can even see it in the DI Like the DI in all the other parts is a bit quieter, and then in the solo, there's a lot more dynamics going on, which is a really fun approach to playing guitar. With the kind of power of a quad cortex or any plugin, you're so easily able to just switch amps in and out and have very drastically different sounds for different sections, but then just keeping it this stripped back and just literally just using the volume knob to change your tone. It's a very fun and different approach to messing with and changing your tone. So yeah, that's just the overall thing about the arrangement that I think is really important, is just to keep your tone consistent throughout the entire track and have your variation just come from the guitar itself rather than any patch changing or stuff like that. I want to quickly talk about that the two different guitar parts, and the choice of guitars here was very much a reference to Bocchi The Rock. So the rhythm guitarist in the band, Kesoku Band, which is the band of Bocchi The Rock, she plays a Gibson Les Paul Jr. with a P90, and if you listen to it, it's quite jangly, quite bright. I don't know if that's actually what was used in the recording. Listening to it, I might say it isn't. It sounds a bit more like a single coil, so what I used instead of something with a P90, I used my Strat. I used this Strat on the bridge pickup, and I chose that partly because to reference that kind of sound, but also because I like the clarity that you get from single coils for these kind of chords under distortion. And then on the right side, obviously, I'm playing a Les Paul. Moving on to the second aspect, songwriting. Now, quick side note, as much as this song is influenced by the world of J-rock, I'm hesitant to call it J-rock, and that's to do with the fact that this song, in my opinion, is more referential than a kind of organic creation of the world of J-rock, if that makes any sense. It's tricky to kind of explain why I feel the way that I do, but I feel like this video by Adam Neely discussing whether or not Loewe is considered jazz puts into perspective what I'm kind of talking about. And I talk about this because there are certain aspects about this song that I deliberately chose because I felt like it referenced that kind of J-rock sound that I was going after. For example, the chord progression. So I want to talk about the chord progression in the chorus as this kind of good example of how a J-rock sound, how a J-rock song could sound like. So let's quickly listen to what that sounds like. This is the chorus. So yeah, that's the chorus. And for those who are familiar with J-rock music, I feel like this is a kind of good representation of the kind of chord progressions and kind of sounds you would come to expect from this type of song. There's lots of variations of this, but I feel like most of the chord progressions that you'd find in this kind of music kind of boil down to this 4, 5, 6 motion. And what I mean by that is the 4 chord, go into the 5 chord, go into the 6 chord. So this song uses, I think, 2 variations of this kind of 4, 5, 6 motion. It goes 4 to 5, 3, and then 6. That's the first variation of it. Here I'm voicing the A flat as a sus2, B flat is just a normal major, and then G as a G minor 7, and then C minor 7. And then the second variation of it is like this. We've got an A flat sus2, and then G7, which points to the C minor. And then this motion right here is something you get all the time in this kind of music. Without diving into the theory too much, it's basically a 2-5 into the 4 chord. What that means is that it's just 2 chords in front of it that really want to point to this chord. I don't want to get too much into the theory of this because that's a whole other can of worms that I don't want to deal with at the moment. But essentially, if you've heard J-rock, you've heard this 2-5 motion to the 4 a lot in a lot of the J-rock songs. again, this is what that sounds like. Yeah, so those are the kind of two variations of this 4/5/6 motion that I've implemented into this song. And going back to the kind of main point of this video is that we're trying to create this song that sounds like a Bocchi The Rock song. And listening to those songs, you can very distinctly tell that there's one guitar part in one ear and a different guitar part in the right ear. That's very much in reference to kind of the visual aspect of seeing them on stage, where you only hear one guitar part on one side and the other guitar part on the other side. And that's reflected in those songs, so I've created that kind of similar thing happening in this song as well. On the left side, I've just got one guitar playing those chords I was talking about earlier. And then on the other side, I've got a different guitar that is basically arpeggiating those chords higher up on the guitar. And those octaves in between is a very kind of, is a very botchy sound, if I can say that. Playing those octaves is a very kind of like punk rocky thing to do. Like for example, something like that. I don't know how that part goes. That was American Idiot. And, you know, it kind of makes sense if you've delved into the history, if anyone's kind of looked into the history of J-rock. There is a very strong punk influence from the kind of early 70s. Kind of British punk was a very big aspect in the overall sound of J-rock. You'll find it dotted all over, for example, like Bocchi The Rock songs, any kind of J-rock song. So I've done it here as well. For example, as well, in the second pre-chorus. And same with the double stops, those kind of... Yeah, that is another big part of that kind of sound. More specifically to do with the Bocchi The Rock music, I feel like. The person who wrote the music for that, watching his videos, he's playing double stops all over the place for some reason, but that's part of the sound, so I'm doing it here as well. I also want to briefly talk about the drums programming. Now that's a whole other can of worms that I could spend an entire video talking about, just how to program drums. But just as a general quick summary and a quick rule of thumb is the drum parts should be kept relatively simple. With the luxury of programming drums, you can very much easily find yourself slipping into the habit of programming way too complicated parts because a computer's doing it for you. Again, it's a rock band, so we want to keep the parts appropriate, just keeping it simple and effective and straightforward. I try to program this as kind of realistically as possible, and a couple of tips that I can offer to help do that. I'll turn snapping off. So when I'm placing notes, I don't have, like, it won't snap to the thing. So right now I've got it on, versus if I were to place a note, it's not exactly on the grid, which helps with that realism. And one more thing as well is being very conscious about the velocity of every single hit and thinking about what velocity each single hit should be, rather than just copy pasting. No matter how good your drummer is, there's still going to be more dominant one-handed versus the other. With this roll, you can imagine this right hand is a bit harder than that left hand. Same again on the right, left hand softer, and then that's an accent, so that's a big hit with the right hand, and then similarly with this roll as well. So that tom's going to be softer because it's like a kind of like a passing note. So this little run, where it's like a snare, tom, floor tom, floor tom. If that's a big pass, that high tom is going to be a bit of a weaker hit, so I programmed it a bit weaker. Just overall things like that, that once you extrapolate to a full beat, can help to add to the overall realism of your drum part. And one more thing to talk about to close out this songwriting section is talking about the bass, how to write an interesting bass line, because if you've listened to any J-Rock song, the bass is probably one of the most captivating parts, I feel like, of a lot of the J-Rock songs out there. I suck at writing melodic bass parts, but I can kind of give a bit of advice to how someone might go about doing that, and that is to think about passing notes. So, for example, in the pre-chorus, so let me solo that. We've got those two chords, this chord, rather than going, we want to think about how to get from one note to the other, but make it sound like it's a continuous flowing line. So instead of doing that, I went. So we've got this kind of like this motion going on. Things like that to be aware of to help give more momentum and give more excitement to the bass part. And the last aspect I want to talk about is the mix. Again, this all kind of goes back to that thing I mentioned at the beginning about keeping the arrangement simple. And that kind of reflects in the mix as well. One thing that's really important for me when I mix is having a reference. For this song, I chose to reference that band from the show as the kind of reference mix. So that's the kind of starting point that I have for this mix. One thing I want to talk about with this mix is that I have two different amps for one guitar. So we have the signal that came off my Quad Cortex, which is the capture of my DSL-20. But then when I came to mix it, I felt like the signal itself was a bit thin, and I couldn't quite grab the depth I wanted from the EQ. So instead, I reamped the DIs that I also recorded using Archetype Rabia on this amp, which I believe is the JCM 800, and I blended those two together. So this is what that sounds like by itself. You can tell it's very honky, has that depth that I was kind of looking for, and blended it in with the original Quad Cortex signal. Versus without them. It's quite different. That mid-range just leapt out immediately, which is an important thing for a thing like this, because we're dealing with such a simple arrangement. We want the guitars to take up a good amount of space, but we also want them to stay focused in the mid-range so that it can occupy a very specific space and allow for the other parts to take up the space that they need. And one more thing about these guitars is I'm able to occupy more of the stereo space by having those two amps, by having one signal be narrower in and then having the other signal be further out. So the Quad Cortex tracks are a bit further in and the reamped signals are a lot further out. And while we were going through the project, some of you might have spotted this venue track. So what this track actually is that I've bussed out all the different instruments to this track and then applied a bit of reverb to this track to make it sound like it's a venue. So let me solo that track and play the chorus for you. So that gives it like a really interesting space for this track to live in. It's quite noticeable in this bridge bit where it's just the vocal and the guitar. If I were to mute it, so without it, that sounds really, really dry. And part of the reasoning of having this track is not only to make it sound like it's at a venue so you're watching it in front of you, but it's also to kind of create the glue that holds everything together, because with such a simple arrangement, each part is going to take up its own space. So I wanted something to kind of bridge them all together, especially with the guitars where we have one side playing rhythm guitar and one side playing lead guitar. It might sound kind of odd where one ear is only getting one guitar and the other ear is getting a different guitar, kind of like when you listen to like an old Beatles record and you just have drums on one side and vocals on the other side. It really helps to bridge them all together. And then let me play that bit again, but turn the venue track off. Yeah, you can tell it really adds a whole amount of space and kind of glue to the whole guitars. One thing I've done as well is I've automated the venue track up and down depending on the intensity of the section. So for the solo, I really wanted that kind of throwing back and forth where you can hear the reverb of one side on the other side. So I turned that up quite a lot for the solo, and then even up further for this bridge section. So that really feels like you're in the venue. You can hear the guitar on the left side, but it's not just isolated on the left side. You can hear the vocal, and it's not just, you know, just isolated right in front of you. There's a real sense of depth and space to it. Speaking of the vocal, I haven't had a chance to really talk about the vocal yet, so I want to talk about it now. So here are the vocals. Now, there's 5 tracks here, but they're not on all at the same time. I've just separated them out this way so that I can process them differently for the different sections. What this actually is just main vocals and harmonies. And I quickly want to talk about Lily's performance because these are really incredible vocal performances. She gave an incredible performance that was very easy for me to work with to mix into the song. The reference song again was Ano Bando, that band, and in that track the vocal is quite heavily saturated. You can hear it in the song. So I reflected that not to the same degree but to a smaller degree by saturating the vocals ever so slightly. So here's what that sounds like. 最後の日このループを抜け出す痛みに耐えてる背中をふるさとへこの電車が導く君のそばへ And one thing about having the saturation as well is you can really tame off the really large discrepancies between the loud parts and the soft parts. It just makes it sound a lot more consistent. And that's also partly helped by the compressor here, which I have on quite a high ratio to, again, just even out those large dynamic differences. 最後の日このループを抜け出す痛みに耐えてる背中を But yeah, the main thing is that I'm not processing it insanely much because I want to keep that kind of very simple arrangement, very kind of live band aspect of it. The delay is very simple, just a quarter note delay spread out. And there's no reverb because we've got reverb coming in from the venue track. So yeah, just a very straightforward, simple processed vocal to make sure it can cut through the mix and nothing too fancy. I can't really think of much else to kind of go over. You know, there's general mixing stuff that I could go over, but it's nothing specific about the kind of topic we're talking about today. So yeah, I think that kind of leaves it then. That's everything I kind of wanted to go over with this song and the general thing of how to create this type of song, this kind of song that you might find in a show like Bocchi The Rock. Go check out the song if you haven't already. Let me know how you get on with trying those tips out in your own songwriting. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care, guys. Bye.